Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Estelle Vasudevan once again. And you can find her at Estelle_Vasudev, the number 1 on Twitter. And the itinerary for today is England versus Sri Lanka, the first test at Old Trafford, in which England won, or even you could say kind of won ugly by 5 wickets, scraped away with a win. And it was quite a competitive test match. Estelle, were you entertained?
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, coming from a Sri Lankan perspective, I thought they exceeded expectations. I don't think a lot of people, particularly non-Sri Lankans, were expecting Sri Lanka to compete as well as they did, particularly as they basically had one warm-up game, right? Just getting used to conditions, haven't played in England since 2016, all of that considered, I thought they did pretty well. I think it's also important, though, not to be too taken up by the fact that they competed well, but also use this test to kind of understand that they can potentially beat England. This is not a series that they should be expecting to lose 3-0. They can certainly be on the winning side in at least one of the 2 tests to come. So I hope that's the kind of thinking, and not now the first game's done. It's time to move on to, trying to win the next 2 games.
You said that they obviously haven't played a test in England since 2016, and they won a series in 2014, right? Which was the first time ever they won. Oh, well, they won the one-off test match in 97 or whatever, but that wasn't a series, so I guess it doesn't count. Yeah. First multi-test series for sure. And I mean, I was at the Rawalpindi cricket ground this week, right? And as soon as it was 3 o'clock in Pakistan, such was the scenario in Rawalpindi that at times it seemed like an absolute snooze fest. So I would go on and stream the England game, and there was some compelling test cricket being played in that particular test match. I ended up watching a lot of it, actually, weirdly enough, because, Pakistan and Bangladesh had me so bored for like 3 days in the middle that I watched a lot of this test match. We'll talk about a lot of things today, performers, scenarios that presented themselves within the game. But let's start by talking about Kamindu Bradman. 113 in the third innings. He's got 300s in 4 test matches now. Has a first-class average of 64, 65. He's also averaging 92 in test cricket. So almost, at par with the Dawn after 4 test matches. And just how good, because this was his first ever outing in England. And he goes out there and smashes 100 in a very, very crucial position for Sri Lanka. Because if not for his 100, this game would be over far earlier than it eventually was.
Well, I will first say that I've been telling people about Kamindu Mendis, the batter, because, I mean, when he did make I think a few years ago when he made his limited overs debut, all the chat was about him bowling with both arms, right? And I mean, I understand that, because in T20 cricket, it can be a massive asset. Like, how many players do you see with that ability, right? But he has always been a really good batter. His batting has always been better than his bowling, right? Just during the last couple of years, he's transformed that potential and that talent into tons of runs in domestic cricket. And that's been rewarded by, him being included in the test team. I know a lot of people will question why it's taken so long for him to come in.
Because if I'm not wrong, Estelle, he did well in his debut game versus Australia, and then we didn't see him for 2 years. So you think that they've actually, Sri Lankan cricket has lost 2 solid years of Kamindu Mendis? Or do you think that it was actually the right time to come in now and become a mainstay potentially for years to come in that middle order?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to defend Sri Lanka cricket's decision in this case, because I feel like, yes, he played really well and he looked so good, right? I was at that test where he got that 70 odd against Australia in 2022. He looked so good. He looked, like I've spoken to you about Pathum Nissanka, right? He looked like his natural game is Test cricket. He knows when to leave the ball. He knows how to time when he plays his shots. All of that. But Sri Lanka for the last few years, if you look at that batting order, they've kind of had a settled batting order, right? They've had obviously Dimuth Karunaratne at the top of the
Hmm.
order. His opening partners have changed on and off, but then
Yeah.
you've had Kusal Mendis at 3, you've had Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal, Dhananjaya de Silva, all of them who are settled, right? And who
Hmm.
have performed. Like if you look at their records, I know there's a lot of scrutiny on Kusal Mendis at the moment, but if you look at the
Yes.
others, they have continuously done really well in Test cricket. So I feel like it would have been tough to leave out one of those players to
Hmm.
include Kamindu Mendis. And I also feel like it's so important to pick a player in form, and he's coming off 2 massive seasons in domestic cricket where he's averaging, I think, 70 plus
Hmm.
um, for the club he plays for, right? So I think that the mental side of things, it helps a lot when you're coming off runs, right? And he hasn't spent 2 years on the bench. He's been playing limited overs cricket. He's sometimes not been in the squad. And Sri Lanka, of course, don't play a lot of Test cricket, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like this is the right time for him because mentally
Hmm.
he's there, he's ready for it. He's now obviously like this would be a huge boost of confidence, right? It's not like
Yeah.
getting runs against England, no matter what you think of their bowling attack in England, is massive, right? It's not like the
Yeah.
200 got against Bangladesh. They came in difficult circumstances, but Bangladesh were without Shakib.
Hmm.
Bangladesh obviously lower ranked than Sri Lanka, but to do it against England obviously would have given
Yes.
him a huge amount of confidence. And I'm particularly happy that they are easing him into things. He's batting at
Hmm.
number 7. I would think eventually he will move up to maybe a number 3 or number 4.
Yeah.
But I like that you're giving that the young player the opportunity. And another thing actually that I missed is that Sri Lanka in the past have been looking at specialist wicket keepers, right? They had
Hmm.
Niroshan Dikwala for the longest time. Then they tried out Sadira Samaravikrama, who got some runs in Sri Lanka. Nishan Madushka also played as a keeper. Kusal Mendis played as a keeper, but at number 3 in the most recent Bangladesh series. Now they have moved on from that specialist role, right?
Yeah.
And they're looking, and that has opened up a spot for more
Hmm.
specialist batter. I think that's the reason that he's got an opportunity, because if they were
Yeah.
looking at a specialist keeper, you would have had Samara Vikrama play, and then Kamindu would have been the one who was sitting out. But
Yeah.
since they have that versatility with Kusal Mendis and Chandimal able to keep, I don't know whether that's going to change in the second
Hmm.
test, because Chandimal
We'll talk
obviously,
about that. We'll
yeah.
get there eventually.
Um, but that's allowed them to play Kamindu Mendis now.
Hmm.
That's opened up an extra batting slot, which I
Hmm.
think a lot of people are kind of missing when they
Hmm.
think that Kamindu has not, like, they've not given him a fair chance. I think
Yeah.
it's just the roles and what they want players for has changed a little bit in the last year or so.
Hmm. I mean, he was batting at number 8 and at times number 9 in the recent ODI series
Yeah.
versus India, and now number 7 in this test match. Look, whilst I agree that he should be batting higher up the order because he does look like he's quality, and now he's got, maiden ton on English soil in his first ever test match. I feel like that is quite huge. And as you mentioned, the previous test series in which he performed was versus Bangladesh, which is a lower ranked side, but this one is against, the Baz ballers,
Yeah.
people who are changing cricket for the love of entertainment. And now he's like, of course, Old Trafford had testing conditions at time. It wasn't like very, very straightforward. So he's got a brilliant 100 in testing conditions, and this is going to go a long way in terms of giving him the confidence to kind of, perform at this level, because he is only 4 test matches old. And of course, that average is going to drop from 92, but maybe, in an ideal or utopian world, you can hope that it always remains ahead of 50, and that would do a world
Yeah.
of good to Sri Lankan cricket. Now, in this test match, Sri Lanka, of course, they batted first. 3 down for 6 in the first innings, then 4 down for 40, eventually 7 down for 113. In the second
Hmm.
innings, they were 2 down for 1. And yet, despite all of that, they competed very, very well against an English team, which, okay, was missing a few names, but was still, they were clear favourites in this test match. Whilst that is promising that Sri Lanka had rescue acts and everything, do you feel like the top order failures have also cost them in this test match?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the top order, don't you? like I mentioned before, Kusal Mendis has been in a bit of a rut in Test cricket. Nishan Madushka obviously new in his role, and I think the big disappointment will be Dimut Karunaratne, because you want runs from him, right? And
Yeah.
we spoke about him establishing his legacy prior to the Test series, because runs here are going to be critical for him in his bid kind of to establish himself,
Yeah.
or to confirm himself as one of the best openers of this era, right? um,
Absolutely.
so that will be the big disappointing factor. Like I said, Madushka is quite new, and you have to accept that with the amount of Test cricket Sri Lanka play, um, it's tough to expect a new player to come and change things as soon as they get into the side, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
Kamindu has been excellent, but it's not something that's a given that you're going to have an opener come in and just be comfortable. So I think he needs some time. He's been in good form in domestic cricket, both in list A and first class cricket. Um, Kusal Mendis, I think, is on very thin ice. Um, hasn't had runs against top eight opposition in the last, top six opposition. Sorry, in the last 3 to 4 years. He's the thing with him is, and I know a lot of Sri Lankan fans will criticize me for saying this, but the thing with him is he's played some spectacular innings, right? So he showed you what he's capable of. Unfortunately, those come very, they're not consistent. He's not getting consistent runs anymore, and I think a lot of that has to do with his role in limited overs cricket. He hasn't had a great run in ODI cricket either, but I feel like he's adapted his game a lot more to T20 cricket, and maybe that is one of the reasons that he is struggling in Test cricket at the moment, especially
Yeah.
coming in at number 3. And I mean, again, I probably will get some comments about this, but if you look at Sri Lanka's history, right, at number 3, Kumar Sangakkara was obviously phenomenal, right? Average
Yes.
of 60 plus. I don't think there's anybody else who has played more than 10 tests who has an average above 35 or 40, right? So
Interesting.
it's historically not a position that we've really had nailed down. We've had players who've scored a lot of runs, or had great records. So um it's a tricky one with him, but I think at some point, potential is only unfulfilled promise, right? It's only a
Yes.
possibility. So if that potential is not translating into results, then you have to make a change. And like
All right.
with a team like Sri Lanka, they don't have the luxury of waiting a whole series, because they play so few tests, right? So you can't be
Absolutely.
giving like long runs to players. He's already had a long run, but like you have to make quick decisions.
So just on that, of course, with respect to Karuna Ratne, I agree that he needs this innings, or a prolific run series in Senna, and he has an opportunity here in England to kind of cement his legacy, because he's averaging over 41, I believe, in Test cricket, but not particularly well in those conditions at all. So there is that little asterisk next to his career that he needs to get rid of. With respect to Kusal Mendis, obviously, like, he was completely undone by Mark Wood.
Yeah.
He was made to look like an amateur versus him, and he has been struggling for runs. So if he is to go out in the next Test match, who replaces him? And do you see a role for Pathum Nissanka somewhere, maybe fitting in? I mean, Madushka failed big time, 4-0 in this Test match, but he's young. You perhaps want to give him time. Nissanka at first drop, then, is that the direction you would go?
I feel like there is no other choice, but it will all depend on whether Dinesh Chandimal will be able to keep, because, like I mentioned before, the finger
Yes.
injury. What I heard is that he'd had lots of pain-killing injections on his hand before coming out to bat in the second innings. So I don't know whether he's going to keep. He will most likely play, but I don't know whether he's going to keep. If he's not keeping and play, but if he does play, then you're going to have to play Kusal Mendis, because that's your other keeping option, right?
Yeah.
But if Chandimal doesn't play and he's not fit to play, potentially they could push Kusal Mendis down to number 6 and play him as the keeper bat, and Pathum comes in at 3. But
And
again,
Samara
like,
Vikrama is also in the squad, so he is a
yeah,
potential
yeah,
replacement as well.
of course, yeah. but Samaravikrama hasn't been in great touch, right? So
Yes.
I think all things considered, it'll be tough to see him in the lineup, unless they're not looking at Nisanka at all, right? If they're going to stick with Kusal Mendes, but I think again it's worth reiterating that even if Pathum Nisanka comes in at number 3, and we've seen him grow exponentially in the last 2 years as a white ball cricketer, right? He's been
Yep.
phenomenal for Sri Lanka, opening the batting in both T20 and ODI cricket, when actually Test cricket is what he was born to do, right?
It
Unfortunately, it
seems like
hasn't.
that.
Yeah, it hasn't turned out that way. Number 3 is going to be really tough. I think that's one thing we have to accept, and we have to also be patient with players like him. But I also wonder, and this comes back to actually something we spoke about yesterday as well, right? What is the incentive for putting in your best limited overs cricketer, right? Um, at the risk of him potentially changing his game, because like he
Yeah.
started off very much a test cricketer. He's developed himself into this white ball monster. Do you want him going back? Is a question, right? I mean, I would
That.
love to see Nisanka, but it is a question for a team that doesn't play a lot of test cricket.
Yeah.
What are you willing to risk in a situation like this? But of course, they're obviously willing to risk it because they've picked him in the squad. But I think it's a question worth kind of pondering, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is a long time ago when Kusal Mendes performed really well against Australia and Sri Lanka defeated Australia, even whitewashed them in that particular
Yeah.
series, from what I remember. That's the series in which Usman Khwaja could not buy a run. I remember distinctly. Varun has a fun stat for us in the comments. He says only 6 Sri Lankan batters have averaged or have had more than 10 matches at number 3. So only 6, which is crazy. Sangakkara averages 61 at 3 for Sri Lanka and Mahela averages 50. Everyone is 37 or lower. So you have a solid point over there. And I'm not entirely opposed to, Nisanka coming in for Kusal Mendes. But I think, to your point, a lot of that depends on whether Chandimal is fit or not. Of course, he had a bruised finger, but a very, brave knock, I would say, of
Yeah.
79, taking all of those painkillers. What's the temperature in Sri Lanka like regarding Chandimal's knock? Because I feel like maybe not enough has been spoken about it amongst all of those other performers scoring 79 runs, being in pain all the while.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether I can explain this to you, but Chandimal is a very polarizing figure in Sri Lanka cricket. You
I've
either
been
love
told.
him
I had a bit of an
or
idea of this.
you hate him. So he doesn't always get kind of the recognition that he deserves, I feel, particularly in Test cricket, right? Because he's been consistently good. Um, he's let me see, averaging 43, and that's not just the lower ranked teams that he's got runs against, right? he
Yeah.
he got a double hundred against Australia recently. He has a good average against India. So he's genuinely one of the best batters Sri Lanka have produced in Test cricket in this era. And like, if you're wondering why I keep emphasizing Test cricket, it's because there is obviously a huge the question mark of whether he was a ODI cricketer or limited overs cricketer, the opportunities he got, all that. But I will say, Chandimal seems to me, I mean, I don't know him personally, but he seems to me like a guy who works on his game really hard, and he works at what he sees are holes in the limit in the team. So if Sri Lanka need a opening batter, he's worked on how to in domestic cricket he tries to work on skills that would help him fill that hole, right? And I think in limited overs cricket, to his credit, he's gone. I mean, he was this fantastic talent when he started off, then he had a huge dip, right? I think he's built himself up quite well, all things considered. I'm not saying he should be back in the white ball setup, but yeah, he doesn't always get the credit he deserves because, like I said, very polarizing figure. I mean, me saying this is going to get me tweets asking if I'm being paid to say it. That type
Anything
of
that we say on this
polarizing.
show or any show
So
will get us those tweets. I've just come to terms with that, right? But I mean, I think he is underrated. I
yeah,
definitely rate Dinesh Chandimal as a test batter. And you're right to say that he's scored some runs versus really good teams as well. And I feel like he should get even more recognition for this particular knock of 79 because it came at a very crucial time for Sri Lanka where it looked like everything might be very might be over very quickly in the third innings, but he stuck around and dug in with Kamindu Mendis and scored that important knock of 79, and that ultimately led to Sri Lanka giving their bowlers something to bowl at, defending 205. But let's go to another seasoned performer for Sri Lanka. The captain, DDS. It's a real shame Jared isn't here for this because he loves to talk about DDS. But Dhananjaya and Silva scored 74 when Sri Lanka, were looking down for the count in the first innings. And he is always a man for a crisis. Like whenever the chips are down, I see DDS produce a knock of epic proportions. And he's made a bit of a habit out of this.
Yeah, he's been really good, like you said, in crisis, right? He's got a lot of runs at that number 6 position. The good thing about it is, like, if you look at his white ball career, right? He's obviously not had a lot of success, right? But he's batted from like 1 to 9 in limited overs cricket. He's batted everywhere, wherever there is a gap. He's just the one who they send in to plug it, right? But in Test cricket, he's been consistently given a position and a role. Yes. And that's why, in my opinion, you're seeing success from him is because he knows what he needs to do, right? And it's not changing every other day or depending on who's playing and who's not. And he's, again, like I said before, Sri Lanka have had very successful batters in this lineup, so it's not an easy thing to break into this limited over Test team because they've been making runs, right? I mean, it doesn't matter the opposition. Once a guy scores 100 or double 100, you can't drop them saying, oh, you scored it against Ireland, so it doesn't matter, right? So
that's stupid.
They've been making runs consistently, and Dhananjaya de Silva, like you said, in tough situations. I think there was a tweet that was going around about like how he always comes in at like 60 for 5 or 70 for 5, and he rescues Sri Lanka, and he did that once again, right? I mean, Sri Lanka, without that first innings, it looked like they would be bowled out for about 120, but they ended up with 230, right? So it was a really great effort from him. He would be disappointed, I'm sure, that he didn't go on to make 100.
But we don't have any DDS slander on this podcast because Jared would fire us if that is the case. But fantastic innings from him. Very, very crucial 74. Helped set up the test match for Sri Lanka. Wasn't the only performer with the bat in the first innings, however. And you called it, Estelle. When we previewed the series, you said that Milan Ratnaike, the tall, lanky right-arm seamer, will be, probably debuting at Old Trafford. He did. His exploits with the ball, though, however, were, bang average. But with the bat in his first ever innings in Test cricket, he almost pulled off an Ashton Agar. 72 runs and, built that partnership with DDS. How surprising was that to you? Did you know he was no bug with the bat?
I mean, he's made runs in domestic cricket. I think he has 2 or 3 50s in first-class cricket.
But this was his highest first-class score, right?
But what was impressive to me was that he looked good. Like, it wasn't just timing the ball, right? Like, I mean, every tail-ender has his day, right? I mean, who was our number 1 pick as the number 11? Was it Glenn McGrath? Glenn McGrath got a 15 Test cricket as well. But
absolutely.
Milan Ratnaike looked like a proper, like he had good technique, right? There was a bit of to me at least, a bit of DDS in that drive. So I was very surprised to see that because I haven't seen him bat. I was just going through an old article someone had done in Sinhalese where they listed his school exploits, and he has hundreds at school level. So obviously there's some foundation there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It was a pleasant surprise, and he also played an imperative role towards, taking this test to day 4, I would say. And had Sri Lanka been bowled out for 140 in the first innings, it was going to be a dead game from the start. Also, another fun fact from Varun in the comments. He says, Dhananjaya de Silva averages more walking in when the average fall of wicket was less than 30. So 155, for example. That would be the average wicket, 30. And then he does over 30. So he actually averages 44.3 when the chips are down versus 33.9 otherwise. So that goes on to prove our point. Now, Milan Ratnaike, we spoke about his batting. Of course, he failed with the ball. And Sri Lanka took 15 wickets in this test match. 11 of those fell to Asitha Fernando and Prabhat Jayasuriya. Asitha took 4 for 103 in the first innings and 2 for 25 in the second. And Prabhat Jayasuriya took 3 for 85 in the first and 2 for 98 in the second. That's 11 wickets out of 15. How big of a concern is it that Sri Lanka are relying on 2 people for all the penetration when it comes to bowling, opposition or bowling the opposition out? And do you see maybe someone like Lahiru Kumara come into the, fold for the second and third test matches? Because I felt like they were missing an enforcer and he could do that job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really great point, because Asita was fantastic, and he's all heart, right? He's the guy who you call whatever the situation, and he's bound to deliver.
Is he your Fernando of choice out of Vishwa,
I was
Behara?
actually okay. I was really actually a bit disappointed with how Vishwa went, because he's usually the guy who, even if he doesn't get wickets, can close up one end and give you that pressure from one end, right? And with baseball, they're looking to score a lot of runs quickly, and when you don't give them runs, there's bound to be a bit of pressure. He just didn't look like he was in rhythm. So I'd be interested to see if he does keep his place for the next game. I still think they can consider Milan Ratnayaka's place, because I know he got a 50 or 70, and it was crucial to Sri Lanka's cause. But he's there to take wickets. He's there as a bowler, right? And I felt like he didn't look like much. Maybe we're judging him too soon, but he didn't look like you said, like someone who can force something to happen. And Sri Lanka need that. So I wonder if Kumara gets a go. Kumara, like I said in our preview, we haven't seen him play recently, so I don't know if the speed is really up to those levels that we saw maybe in the white ball World Cups. But he would certainly fill that gap as the enforcer, right?
Yes.
Another one is Kasun Rajitha, who does swing the ball a lot, right? So I mean, one of the two I would think would come into the side, because Sri Lanka do need to make things happen. Like you said, they can't rely on Asita Fernando to do everything. Prabhat Jayasuriya I thought was good.
I thought he was really good, by the way.
Yeah,
In between, in the first innings at least, there were times where he was unplayable. And
Yeah,
England
yeah.
could not score a run at that particular point, right?
Yeah.
I was having dinner with Mohammad Assam at this Nihari place, and the game was on. And we were like watching the game, and then food came. And then we properly ate our food for a good half hour. I looked back up, I was like, they've scored 10 runs in
Yeah.
all of this time? So that
Actually
was
have a great stat about it. I think Ben Jones from Crick Viz had posted it. So 5% of balls were hit to the boundary by England in this test. Only 5%. That's
they
their
weren't
lowest.
balling as such. This
That
was
was
a
the
different
that's
kind of
the
win.
that's the lowest percentage in the baseball era. So Sri Lanka's tactics to a great extent worked, but they didn't have that incisive force apart from Asita and Prabhat in some spells, right? So that's certainly something they'll have to look at, whether they want to make a change after just one test. I know it can be a bit unfair to some players, right, when you're replaced after one game. But like I said, like, you don't have a lot of time to be testing things
Yes.
out, right? You've got to get
Absolutely.
results.
100%. And you can take me on record for this, Estelle, and everyone else who's watching, people in the comments. We've got a lot of comments over here today as well, actually. We've got Orville De Silva, Vignesh Murli, Dwarka Vamshi, Varun is there, Cinema Scope, Sankalp Verma, everyone, and Estelle. You can keep me on record when I say this. Watch out for Prabhat Jayasuriya in London, Lords and the Oval. This time of year in England, late summer, where surfaces and conditions are expected to be a bit dry. If they couldn't handle him too well in Old Trafford, I feel like if Sri Lanka to win a test match over here, Prabhat Jayasuriya is running through England in one of these tests. They're not fantastic players of spin. And he is someone who has been a mainstay in Sri Lanka's test team for a while now. Sure, he's been a Gaul specialist or whatever, but Estelle pointed out in the last podcast, he's played a lot at Gaul, right? So this is a true test for him. And I feel like the conditions will really, really favor him in London. Yasir Shah did really well, for instance, in 2018 over there. Was it 2018? 2016, where he took 2 10-fers and both came at Lords and Oval. Those are the 2 test matches that Pakistan won. So Prabhat Jayasuriya could play that role for Sri Lanka over there. You can hold me to it. And I mean, if I'm wrong, then slander me. If I'm right, then whoever, CS, make a clip out of this, dude. Like, if I get this right. Anyway, let's talk about that innings, okay? So I watched that innings quite a lot. England's first innings after Sri Lanka had posted 230 odd or something. So, they were off to a decent start. Then Harry Brook was batting at 56, and that's when Prabhat cleaned him up. At that particular point, Sri Lanka seemed like they could really come into the game because it was tough scoring for England. They weren't being able to find runs very easily. But then Sri Lanka conceded a lead of over 100, was it? 122, if I'm not wrong. And, the main protagonist for England in that rescue act was Jamie Smith. In his fourth test match, he scored his maiden test 111 runs in total. And after 4 tests, he's got 357 runs, an average of 59.5, 102 50s, has not put a foot wrong, and is keeping wicket as well. I believe at the end of the day, when I look at everything, all things considered, that Jamie Smith knock was the difference between both teams. And I feel like where Sri Lanka lost the plot well and truly was not with the bat, but if they had rolled over England quickly at that period when they got Harry Brook out, because he was the top scorer then with 56. That was the moment to cash in, and they missed out. But credit to Jamie Smith as well. I mean, he seems to be one hell of a batter and a real gem that England have got in their ranks.
Yeah, absolutely. He was the big find for them, right, in that test. Just the way he batted with so much confidence and assurance. And remember, England
and a long tail, Estelle, a very, very long tail.
That's what I was going to say. They played one batter short, right? They had Vokes at number 7. And just again, to come back to your point about the incisiveness of Sri Lanka, I think that's where you need that guy who can scare the batters, right? Basically scare the tail out. And they didn't have that kind of bowler. I mean, Asitha Fernando can be really aggressive, but he's not got the pace. So Lahiru Kumara, even at, I mean, if he can clock 145, he's still hitting the bat really hard. So he is the type of bowler who would put that little doubt in the tailender's head, right? Like, I mean, if you watch the Sri Lankan innings, you could see that when Markwood came on, Prabhat Jayasuriya was not coming up on the front foot. He was on the back foot right throughout, right? That's just because of that little psychological thing where he's going to bounce me. So Jamie Smith was fantastic. I thought he played really well with the tail. And of course, I mean, Vokes, Atkinson, even Wood, they're not terrible with the bat, but I don't think any of them are number 7 batters, right? So
I would have Vokes at 8, never at 7. Even though I rate him as a batter as well.
So that's probably where you're right. Like, Sri Lanka really, lost a lot of momentum in the game with that little extended period where England was able to kind of get a substantial lead.
Yeah, I mean, if that lead was 22 rather than 122, Sri Lanka would be defending 305, and bam, that might have been the difference, right? That might have been enough runs to defend versus England. And Joe Root, who scored an unbeaten 62 in the second innings and kind of saw England home, actually said that he channeled his inner Nasir or inner Nasir Hussain, and that sometimes you've got to win ugly. England admitted that this wasn't particularly like the way they want to play, and this wasn't Bazball as we know it. And this is the second iteration of Bazball, as Sankalp Verma has pointed out in the comments as well. What's your early take on it? Because there have been phases, like especially in the West Indies series, where England have scored 50 in 5 overs or something like that, or less than 5 overs. So it's not like they always play like this. But in this particular test match, where the conditions got a bit testing, I don't know if Sri Lanka threw them off their plans or what, but Joe Root himself said that, sometimes you got to win this way. And I mean, he's such an experienced bat that he was the perfect person actually to kind of orchestrate that victory in the end. So what's your take on it? Do you feel like, the future of Bazball is going to be different?
Well, I think it's all a bit of testing, isn't it? Right? They did the all-out attack, and I think it's a sign of maturity and learning to go back to something that, like, I mean, we spoke about it in the preview, right? When I told you, like, Bazball is always going to give Sri Lanka an opportunity into the game, right? Because they play so aggressively, and sometimes the aggression is kind of recklessness. It's not just aggression, right? And that obviously opens a door in some situations to the opposition. And when you understand where you need to kind of tone it down, then that makes it so much more difficult for the opposition team, because they know you can score. They know you can score fast. They know you can take the game away from them in 2 sessions, right? They can score 400 in like 2.5 sessions and take the game completely away from them, from the opposition. But they can also do this. So that, I think, makes it even tougher for the opposition sides, and it made it tougher for Sri Lanka. But I do think tactically Sri Lanka's main goal was don't let them score fast, because
Yeah.
that's going to frustrate them. And we're going to get wickets. And I think that worked with the top order, right? You had like
Yeah.
the guys like Dan Lawrence, Ollie Pope, going for some expansive shots
I
and
mean,
getting out.
Estelle, in the fourth innings, there was a point where England were, what, 3 for 70,
Yeah.
if I'm not wrong. At that point, I was like, maybe we have a surprise result over here. And the game was, well, maybe slightly in England's favour still, but Sri Lanka had every opportunity to win it from there.
Yep.
And that's where Joe Root's knock was so imperative. And the fact that he kind of dug in and just saw this result through, which was very un-Bazball like. Do you think Ollie Pope might have had a role to play over there? Would Stokes have done things differently as captain?
I don't know. All I can say is that as a Sri Lankan fan, Joe Root is a menace. He makes runs against Sri Lanka everywhere, and it's always in winning causes,
Yeah.
right? He's just been phenomenal, right? So, and to your point, I think Ben Stokes would have been a lot more aggressive because he comes in with the confidence that he's done this so many times before, right? He's been like their I mean, he's dragged England through some games on his own in some
Clutch
chases,
Central.
right?
He is
Yeah.
Mr. Clutch.
So I don't think he would have been conservative, but it helps to have a player like Root who can play both types of innings, right? And I thought
Yeah.
Brook was also good in both innings.
Yeah, I love that sort of versatility, and I feel like Test cricket is such a beautiful sport that you will have different phases in which you can, approach the game in different ways. And I felt like England, going back to just kind of grinding it out and getting a result is equally important because fans want to be entertained, sure, but fans like wins. They like winning.
Yeah.
And results sometimes are more important. And I feel like this, as you mentioned very correctly, this might be a sign of growth and maturity within the English squad. And Bazball 2.0 might be a whole lot interesting in that regard. I'm going to be watching this series very, very closely after this particular test. And just one bit that I really wanted to discuss with you. Angelo Matthews, our favorite complainer in the world. Of course, he scored 65 important runs with the bat as well in the third innings. But he did mention that there was a ball change when Sri Lanka were batting on day 4, was it? I think it might be. Yeah, it was day 4. And after that,
day 3.
Was it day 3? Okay,
Yeah.
I might have gotten that one wrong. So anyway, either way, when Kamindu Mendis and Dinesh Chandimal were batting well, there was apparently a ball change.
No, when it was Matthews and Kamindu were batting.
Okay.
So Chandimal
Sorry.
had retired hurt and
Okay.
on
I missed that particular phase of play. I joined in a bit later. But yeah, so there was a ball change and that kind of triggered a mini collapse within Sri Lanka's batting. Should we take him seriously? What do you have to say about it? Is he on to something over here?
Okay. One question. Have we seen this before?
I mean, of
We
course,
have.
remember this was very recent. Was Australia
The
the
last
team complaining
season.
back then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a very clear difference in the two balls, right? As at least visually.
Yeah.
So what I've heard, and I'm not an expert on the Duke's ball, right? But what I've heard is Matthew saying that the umpires had informed them that they don't have old enough balls to match the condition of the ball that they were trying to replace. That is one thing. But also Ian Bell came out, Sri Lanka's batting consultant, and said
right.
that there was an instance where Sri Lanka had requested for a ball change, but it had not been approved. So that they would hope that there is consistency for both teams, which I think is probably the line that you want to go with, is that one thing is you can't be having a ball that's drastically different replacing the ball, right? Because yes, we made fun of Angelo Matthews complaining about the timeout. But
Yes.
what is his point was that you work so hard to dull out the ball, right? To get the shine off the ball, and then they replace it with a shiny ball. And it did change things. I mean, Sri Lanka lost only 1 or maybe 2 wickets, but they produced a lot more chances in that spell, right? And I think it's probably felt more because it did happen last season as well, and there was a drastic, change in how things went. So I hope that there is some discussion on how things can go, because I mean I've been hearing lots of things about them, like the older Duke's balls apparently swing more, and there are some more sets of balls. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the Duke's ball, but I think there is some validity to the concern by Matthews, because there was a difference in how things went. And if they're telling you that they don't have balls that match the condition of the ball they're trying to replace,
Yeah.
then I mean there should be some kind of way you go about things, right?
Well, there you have it, guys. Hot take by Estelle Vasudevan. She has thrown her weight
Angelo was right.
behind
Angelo was right.
Angelo Matthews. This is like that X-Men dialogue, right? Where they're like, Magneto was right. So you're saying Angelo was right. Marvel nerds will get
But
this.
you know
joke.
what? Like, whatever, like whether we think he's right or wrong, what I've liked about Angelo Matthews in the last couple of years is that he's finally speaking. Like, he's not afraid to, rub people the
Yeah.
wrong way. So that's a good thing, because he's usually very like calm, and he will give you like the PR answer, but it's good to see.
Just take his Twitter away from him. Anyway, let's come to England's bowling for a bit, and overall fielding as well. England dropped 2 catches when Sri Lanka were kind of doing well in the third innings. They dropped Angelo and they dropped Kamindu Mendis as well, and that maybe allowed Sri Lanka to post that 205 target as well. Sri Lanka fielded far better. I feel there was only like one half chance in the last innings. Other than that, I don't think they dropped anything. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But England's bowling, I mean, there were times in between where it seemed very frustrating for England to kind of get a breakthrough. And sure, Chris Woakes was their best bowler, 3 for 32 in the first innings, 3 for 58 in the second. He is always phenomenal in English conditions. We know that much. We expect Chris Woakes to deliver performances like these. But apart from him, like Matthew Potts got 3 wickets in one innings, Shoaib Bashir got 3 wickets in one innings, Gus Atkinson was okay, Mark Wood got injured, but he was like threatening whilst he was around. How do you rate that bowling performance all in all? And this is life after Jimmy, of course. Do you think that England have some promise over here, or they're going to struggle at Lords and the Oval? Because you can expect some decent batting conditions at times as well this time of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, you only have to look at Sri Lanka's second innings once Wood was out, right? They looked a lot more comfortable with the bat. There were some silly shots, I thought, by the tailenders, particularly Prabhat Jayasuriya, that kind of wrapped things up in like half an hour after Kamindu got out. But other than that, England didn't look, threatening at all without
And
Wood.
the catches that they dropped, Estelle, were regulation catches. It wasn't like they were tough ones. Like the Sri Lanka one that I can remember for them last innings was a tough one. These ones should be like snapped.
Yeah, so that's I mean, it's very interesting to me that they basically forced Jimmy into retirement, but it doesn't feel like they have a contingency plan or who they're going to go to next. I mean, Atkinson and Wood played all 3 tests against West Indies, didn't they? And then obviously Wood is out for the rest of the series.
So
but
on that, actually, Wood is out for the rest of the series, but his replacement is Josh Hull. I had to look this guy up, Estelle.
Left armour.
I had no idea who he is. So left armour, 6 feet, 7 inches, tall bloke. Only 16 wickets in 10 first-class games.
Yeah.
So he is another quick whiz pick like Shoaib Bashir and Tom Hartley before the India series. Release points and all of that. Do you think England was validated by Bashir and Hartley that this is the right way to go? The caveat is that, sure, Josh Hull is this quick whiz pick and he's got the height, left arm angle, but he's not got the record. No one, I think, in the history of English cricket would have debuted for England after taking 16 wickets in 10 first-class games. And is this a deterrent to other people who are in the first class circuit, that how will we get into the side when just some random bloke can come and replace Mark Wood? So how do you feel about all of this?
I mean, there's always going to be someone who feels like they've been hard done by, right? But I think when you're in charge of a team, you have to make the tough decisions, even if you're going to be criticized for it late. I mean, if you think back, when there was this whole discussion about racism and quotas and stuff with South Africa cricket, there was the allegation that somebody missed out because they picked AB de Villiers, right? I don't know whether that was racism or not, and it's not my place to say. But if it wasn't, then you're making a decision that you see this guy has a high ceiling, right? And you're picking him based on that. And sometimes the record doesn't matter. I mean, if you look at Sri Lanka's past alone, like people like Arjuna probably didn't play a lot of first class cricket before I think he debuted for Sri Lanka at 18, right?
Oh,
and
did
where
he?
did he end up? Yeah. So, I mean, my dad used
World
to
Cup
always
winning
tell me
captain.
about
That's where he
people
ended
like
up.
Ranjan Madugala,
Hmm.
Arjuna Ranatunga may have got into the setup because of different forces. But if that's not the case, uh, there's probably someone seeing potential in them and having to make a decision. Sometimes it could be wrong, right? It could
I
be
mean,
the
I
wrong
just
decision.
feel for people like Sam Cook, who has been so
Yeah.
good in the county circuit for Essex for year on year on year, wobble ball specialist. So he's someone I feel is really hard done by over here. Dylan Pennington is
Mm.
injured, right? But
Injured.
he got selected for England just now. And now they've gone for Josh Hull, which seems like very rogue, very hipster. I'm not sure if they'll play him at Lords, but I'm quite sure that he has to do something really special to replace or replicate the impact of Mark Wood in that
Yeah.
team, because we know what his extra clicks can do. They can
Yeah.
he's making batters like dance on their toes. That's
Yeah.
what he does.
Absolutely.
I'm not too sold on this English attack. That's why I feel like Sri Lanka are in the game even more. England have got injuries. Stokes is out. Crawley is out. They're playing a deeper or not as deep batting lineup with the extra bowler. The rest of the bowlers, Gus Atkinson had a phenomenal start to his Test career, but he hasn't been all too great after. He was not good in Trent Bridge versus the West Indies, and he was just okay in this Test match versus Sri Lanka. So, I mean, Vokes is the guy that they'll be looking at for inspiration. Other than that, I feel like this bowling attack that England is set to field is a bit suspect. And that's something Sri Lanka could cash in on.
Yeah, I mean, it does open the door to Sri Lanka, but I also think that from England's point of view, right? Like I said, I mean, they don't have Anderson anymore. They've basically shown him the door, right? It is also a rebuilding phase because they don't have a chance
Yeah.
of making it into the World Test Championship final.
Yep.
So they don't, I mean, losing to Sri Lanka at home would not be great, but there's not much for them to lose, right? In this kind of, in the way they play, uh, they want to build something that will be successful maybe in the next cycle, or
Yeah.
well, do they care about the World Test Championship? I don't know. They
Or the
care about the
Ashes.
Ashes. Yeah.
Yeah, they're building
So
up towards the Ashes in 18 months' time. That's what we keep hearing from them.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
agree with you. It is a team in transition, and we will, know more as we see more. And maybe Josh Hull goes on and takes a 10 for who knows, right? Like maybe quick whiz picks are the way
yeah.
to go forward. So, I mean, anything else you want to add on all of this? Because I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think you're absolutely right that Sri Lanka does have an opportunity, and that the performance in the first game will for certain give them a lot of confidence. But like I said, like it's you can't be dwelling on that for too long. They performed well, but there are two more games remaining, and take it as, this is their best chance to win another series in England, and move forward like that without thinking of, we need to compete. That's enough.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be the standard.
So we've got Lords in the Oval coming up. I think your prediction was 2-1
2-1
England.
or 1-1,
Yeah,
but
and
it
my
looks like
prediction was
1-1 won't
also,
happen.
yeah, 1-1 probably won't happen because the Manchester test was the one in
Well,
which
yeah.
rain was threatening everything. So I still feel Sri Lanka can steal a test over here. I know people might think that's, maybe not possible, but I have that gut feeling. Would you say the same?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the performance in the first game has just strengthened the fact, or the thought that it's possible. They can beat
Yeah.
this England side. This England side is not even psychologically not that towering English side when you have like a Ben Stokes, right, or a Mark
Yeah.
Wood.
And I
Those are
mean, Dan
little things.
Lawrence, I
Yeah,
wasn't too sold on Dan Lawrence, the opener. I feel like they did miss Crawley a lot. The batting was all looking a bit slim. Jamie Smith kind of rescued them over here. Can he
yeah,
rescue them again? He looks like a class act, but how long can he continue to do this? He's mentioned how Test cricket is draining, but he's ready to bat at 6, right? He said those words. But can he do it, on a dry afternoon in Lords or the Oval? That's what we'll have to see. But anyway, thank you to you, Estelle, for your time and all of your insights, and to everyone who turned up in the comments section. No super chats today, which is a bit disappointing, guys, but we'll give you more opportunities. Yeah, we did miss one yesterday. So that guy, actually, it was Bharat Ramachandran. Maybe I think that was the name. I'm sorry if I've forgotten the full name. It was something Ramachandran. he said that Estelle should be a guest on Pro Sports as well. So yeah, at some point Sri Lanka will tour Pakistan. I will make sure Estelle at least comes for the Rawalpindi games, and she has a place to stay over here as well. Door is always open. So whenever that happens in our lifetimes, of course I will bring Estelle to Pro Sports. That is obviously happening, guys. Anyway, just a quick reminder to everybody, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. It can prove to be a one-stop shop for you for all of the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be video content, podcasts, or written content as well. And whilst I was saying all of that, we've got a super chat. So Sankalp Verma has sent one, and let's see what he has to say, Estelle. Sankalp Verma with 100 Indian rupees has said, "No way, no super chats. Thanks for the work. Keep it up, guys." And thank you, Sankalp, for giving us that extra money and making us look good in front of Jared. I suppose that's what it all comes down to. But anyway, that kind of wraps up this review. We'll be back tomorrow once again, Estelle and I, for an Uncovered-esque sort of Good Areas live episode in which we're going to talk about current affairs within cricket, because there have been many things and all of those things need to be discussed now before more of them accumulate. So tomorrow is going to be a pretty fun podcast. Definitely catch us for that around the same time, or I'll discuss with Estelle whatever works for her. And then also soon enough we will be reviewing the T20 series or T20I series between South Africa and the West Indies. So lots of live shows coming up, plus all the videos that Jared has recorded in our backlog. So you guys are sorted for at least 10 days ahead, and go and have a good one. Enjoy yourselves. We'll be back once again tomorrow for another live episode of Good Areas. That is all for now. Goodbye.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber.